Welcome to the podcast that guides men to demystify and develop their intuition. I'm your host, Doug Bites. Let's dig into the science and expand your horizons. Okay, well, we're back for another podcast. Today I'm talking with Andrew Short, who's a close friend and former work colleague from my days as a professional firefighter. These days, Andrew is an outcome-driven emergency services senior executive who has served in various key roles across permanently staffed, volunteer, and corporate subsets of the industry. He's a known and acknowledged reform leader with a history of realising positive and progressive public safety organisation and community outcomes. Skilled in strategic planning and operations, emergency services, human capital management, leadership development and coaching, labour relations, and performance management. Amongst many other accolades, Andrew has received significant recognition and awards as a mentor and is the recipient of the Australian Fire Service Medal. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Doug.
Yeah. So when I started this podcast over 2 years ago, Andrew was the first person, he probably didn't realise it, to congratulate me on doing it. I put it out there at 5 a.m, it went live. I put a Facebook post out letting people know. And Andrew didn't just message me and say, congratulations. 7:30 in the morning, my phone rang. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. It was pretty good. Like, because in this day and age, the phones don't ring much anymore. People were texting, messaging all the time. And
so that was me?
Yeah, that was Andrew. Yeah, first person to congratulate me. Yeah. And then about 18 months later, I was in a bit of a podcast hole, which I shared a little bit of it with Andrew. And I mentioned in the intro, he's received significant recognition in emergency services as a mentor. And I don't even know whether you realised it or not, but you did help mentor me through my little pothole, my podcast pothole. You and one other significant person in my life, and dug me out of that hole. And and I know back then I was a little bit I wanted to share about intuition. And Andrew and our combined background here is emergency services and firefighting, particularly when I was there like 20 plus years ago. And it's intuition and energy and things like that. It's not something that fireys talked about.
No, it's a bit out there.
Yeah. So I'm curious, two plus years ago, what did you think when you started hearing me talk about energy, intuition?
The intuition part, which we're going to spend time today on, kind of connects with me quite naturally. And I think it's something that I've always been interested in. And indeed, your push to help people in understanding how to better use intuition, particularly males, has actually invigorated me to stick my nose into something which I thought that I had reasonable knowledge about. But actually, like anything in life, if you stick your nose in and want to learn more about something, there's always something more to learn about something. So the intuition part, for me, it was a fairly natural thing. The other topic you mentioned being energy, I'm probably still trying to understand that well, and maybe that speaks to me being in respect to energy and energy flow, being quite conservative about it. So I've probably got more work to do there to maybe open my mind up to other parts of the concept of energy and how it works in our life. I think I could probably learn more. But again, people, I think like us, and I'll say us, who have got interest in many things, sometimes you just got to pick which thing you're going to put your energy into to use that term. Yeah. So one's pretty straightforward, being intuition. The energy one, I'm probably work in progress.
Yeah. And the second question I had there was like, like what did you think of it 2 years ago and what do you think of it now? It's like, has it grown on you a little? Like,
are you talking energy or are you talking intuition?
All of it, all of the different things that I talk about.
I think in terms of energy, I'm acutely aware, or a lot more aware now, of where I am. Meaning, am I in a high energy moment, or clear energy moment, or am I a bit? Is it a bit fogged out? So I've probably become better at understanding where I am at a particular time, and in terms of where I'm going, where I'm going to put my energy, or whether I can affect something or I can't affect something because of where the energy concept actually is for me. So I think it's something that everyone should understand more, and probably everyone out there would understand that there are days where you've got enough energy that you could resolve anything in the world, and other days where you're probably having trouble putting two thoughts together. It's quite an interesting thing.
So if I use the term there, some days there's static in the energy field. Look, some days you're in your car, like the old-fashioned car with the dial, and you've tuned in to the radio station that you want.
Yep.
And the song's playing on the radio that you love, and it's good. And then the next day you're driving somewhere different and you're further away from the radio station and there's static coming through.
Yeah, static or white noise. And certainly I think the same applies to intuition. There are days where you've got clarity and the messages that are coming to you are very clear. And there are other days where, and I'm someone who's got to be really mindful of this, because if I'm not at my best in terms of mindset, attitude, then I'm more likely to be hearing a lot of white noise and potentially, if I'm not careful, reacting to things which are not real. So that's been a lesson for me.
And reacting and responding are two pretty important words. Fire service. I can remember in the early days when we were riding the trucks, we were at different regions. I was on the Gold Coast, you're in Brisbane, so we had different firecom, and firecom's where they take the emergency calls, the 000 calls here in Australia, or the 911 calls in the US. And those people, that they would come on the PA system to us here on the Gold, and they would say, respond to this address, to this type of incident, rather than, they never said react. Sometimes when we got to the fireground, some of us, me included, at times would react rather than respond. And if we responded, we did it in alignment with our training. Everything went a lot smoother, but if we reacted to the moment and let our emotions, and I love emotions, but some days they'd make us
and this is where those two words, respond and react, the two words have got a lot of common ground. However, there's some very big differences. And I think what you've alluded to is when you react to something, whether it be an emergency incident or whether it be a situation in a different workplace or indeed in your private life, when you're reacting to it, sometimes you can be not necessarily in control. You might be on the back of the horse, but you're not necessarily controlling where that horse is going, which is reacting.
Just reminded me of an incident that happened one night at the station. I was at the big station at Southport, and there's probably like 10 or 12 of us on duty. And usually, 2, 3 in the morning, which is about this time this incident happened, the lights would come on, you hear the engine bay doors opening, and over the PA system, respond to. Well, this night, none of that happened. This night, big, very loud crash into a power pole beside the station. 7 people had stolen a car, and they were, very overcrowded, this car, and just happened to crash it. So none of us responded. We all reacted. We threw our clothes on, dressed. I was sleeping closest. I was actually the first one there, and I ran out the front door. Didn't jump in the fire engine and move it out. Eventually we did that, but every one of us reacted. And because we were there, we didn't have time to go through our normal training And what we'd been taught in the truck on the way, you know, the officer in charge would say, Doug, you do this, Andrew, you do that, da-da-da-da-da, make sure this happens. Because we'd have 3 to 5 minutes to arrive and we would discuss the incident en route. But this night, we all arrived individually, like 5, 10, 20 seconds apart as we all got down there. Because we were all sleeping in different parts of the station and I was a snorer. So I had my little side and I was the closest to it. I heard it the loudest. And it was chaos for, you know, like I remember the guy who brought the truck out. He didn't even put the handbrake on. And the truck started rolling. It was just rolling. You know, it was a circus. And 7 teenagers in a car, you know, smashed into this power pole. It was just, and they were those who got out were wandering around the streets in a daze. And
it's interesting that you've mentioned it because I had the same thing happen where I was, and I think I was at Anley Station in Brisbane, and you know, heard a massive noise, which I don't think anyone else heard except for me. And of course, there was a car into a power pole, you know, probably 50 metres down the road. Mm-hmm. And of course, you know, you do what you do and you react to you know, use that term. And I went down there. Thankfully, I grabbed a radio, but I didn't grab anything else. So there I was in my, and back in that era, we wore you know, dungers or just you know, our cotton sort of dark cotton uniform, which then you put the actual turnout gear over the top. And so I walked down there, and again, you get there, and it's so out of the ordinary. You know, and I'm thinking, what do I do here? Do I radio in, which I did, but then I go, well, do I go back to the station and get the rest of the crew? And so we made it work out. But when things don't get delivered to you in the way that you're being trained, as a point that you made, it's funny watching humans deal with a different set of circumstances, and sometimes in I think in industries like emergency services, which so much rely on you know, standardised protocols.
Yes, very much.
That for this we do this, and for that we do that, and then there's a combination. Of course, there's a teamwork layer which goes right over the top of that, and you spoke about how everyone from your station got there in time individually.
Yes.
But that really has an effect on how well that team can come together. But I'm sure that like for me that night, once we get past the unique way that the incident came to us, you end up in the place you want to be, which is everyone knowing their role and everyone doing their job to actually resolve it. Yeah. But it's interesting, both you and I have had a similar thing happen. Yeah. And there's probably many others who, because there's no limitation on where car accidents are going to happen.
Exactly. Yeah. And just backtracking prior to that story, just reminded me of something. We were talking about, I'm not going to bring it to memory, it was back to the static in the car. So we're driving where we normally drive, we're hearing the song we like, everything's great. The next day we go rural and we're going to go back to an old-fashioned car that had antennas. And we might barely have our antenna up on our 30 or 40-year-old car now because we're driving in town where the radio stations are. Now we start to head out rural and we start to lose the frequency. So we pull over to the side of the road and we pull the antenna up. Whereas all the antennas are all built in now. You can't put them down or up. Back then we put the antenna up, but we learnt that skill and now we can enjoy our songs and we're back to normal. And I'm just trying to think now where I was going with that, because I was bringing it into something that you just said. I mean, the point on its own is valid, that we've got to recognise on some days when the static's coming in, there is sometimes a small adjustment can change the energy back to normal. We hop out, we pull the antenna up. Or before we get in the car, we know today we're going rural. We know we need a boost to our energy signal and we raise the antenna. And it can make
a big difference,
quite a lot. And then I just remembered where we're going, because years ago, you and I went on that task force of 100 firefighters to
Sussex Inlet.
Sussex Inlet, south of Sydney. Yeah. And what did we take? We took 2 radio technicians, with a trailer with antennas because we knew we were going interstate and our radios didn't mesh with the state we were going to assist. And you remember the day of the firestorms, we were screaming at the technicians because our radios wouldn't work. And our mobile phones didn't work because the firestorms, the smoke was so thick, the signal couldn't penetrate through the intensity of it. So
and then there, of course, there was the damage to the infrastructure, which means that comms invariably goes down in the big events.
So now that didn't happen very often. That only happened to me once in my fire service career. I'm not you've been around there a lot longer. I don't know whether you've experienced that again, but in our lives, that's not a daily or monthly event. That's like whenever. So we had to adapt the best we could. And I remember walking around after the firestorm came through on my own because we had to spread out and, watch things burn because we didn't have the resources, but I had to not react. I had to just stay calm. I watched several houses burn down because I couldn't physically with my hands stop them from burning. And I didn't have the resources. We were spread so thin.
Yeah, we had 5 crews with us, and once each of those crews engaged into try to either stop a fire getting onto a house or to put out a fire on the house, you're done. And I do remember, we were using our own radio equipment to then retask. Once a crew let me know that they'd done everything they could for that property, then I would, or we would, identify another property or another street that they should go to. So we got our way through it, but it certainly fell into the category of not a unique situation in the sense that it's so far removed from the traditional triple call. 000 comes in. Firecom, responds a crew. It's all very neat, and then whoever's in charge of that first vehicle makes some judgments on how much more help they need, as opposed to what we're involved in, which was a very different set of circumstances. And I still remember that in terms of the comms, because we couldn't speak to New South Wales Fire or their Firecom. We were essentially freelancing a bit because they couldn't get us information about where they wanted us to be. So we were having to, take what we could see and make our own decisions. And that day when we actually went into the township to try to do what we could, and seeing the New South Wales teams coming out, because clearly, and I didn't know at the time, it was a bit confusing at the time watching these New South Wales appliances, and it's a fire truck for people listening, and crews coming out. It was because they'd been asked to leave because of the danger involved. But anyway, thankfully our mob, no one got hurt, and I think we certainly got some great feedback from some of the locals who knew that it was our action that saved their house from burning, because we put the shed that was on fire at the back. We put that out, all the fence. We put that out, so it didn't climb onto the house. And great memories, and probably we could probably explore it more about the concept of intuitively understanding what's happening around you.
But and I guess for me, it's like that was definitely a once in a lifetime event, and I was able to, there's days in the fire service where I struggled to stay calm. But when we were there, I was fine. Like I say, because there was no residents, everybody had left, there was no one to point anything out to you. You're walking down a smoke-filled street for the first time, not knowing what's going on. Then you'd see a caravan on fire, someone's boat beside the house on fire, and trying to find a garden hose that hadn't burnt through or something, some sort of resource. But I was able to just go, okay, I'm going to save what I can. I was able to still respond and not react and freak out and just run away. So if we get into life's unusual circumstances, we can, where we don't have, we've put the antenna up as high as we can, And those two radio techs, they were working their butts off trying to move the trailer with the the boosters.
Yeah,
and
because it was all about where they had the tower. Yeah.
And everyone was doing what they could, and it was really just that one day out of the week that was the worst day, where it was crazy. Because I remember you and I went for a drive. We left and we headed back to the highway, and we had the big tall gum trees on either side of that road, and then we sort of got, and eventually we turned around and come back, and I was sort of thinking, is the firestorm going to go across the top of the road while we're still driving through here? It was like, I was just sitting there, I think we were both pretty quiet.
And you might recall that one of our crews, I think Queensland had at least two task force, two strike teams there, and I remember one of the crews from the other strike team, whether just keen to help or whether they were operating outside their level of experience, but thought that they could stop that fire crossing that highway. and I remember the crew or whoever who was in charge chose to go in and start to put the fire out, probably not appreciating that this thing was going to go to the top of them anyway. And I remember I was standing next to a senior New South Wales officer who's probably more attuned to the conditions that you have in that, whether it be Blue Mountains or
low humidity.
And of course his comment was, what the hell are they doing? And thankfully, a radio message went in there saying, please remove yourself as a priority. So again, no one got hurt, but that's the whole thing. And I think we could sit here all day and talk about emergency responses. Or responding to emergencies, and probably form a parallel to life, in that life is not straight. Life doesn't give you every day as being wonderful and good. So every life has its challenges, and probably no different to emergency services. Some days you're on your game, and some days it's a bit tougher, and certainly, and I know we're going to get on and speak about intuition, but my experience has been that some of the best leaders I've seen in your former industry and still my current industry have been people who are very intuitive, because they've probably got an incredibly rich base of experience that they can use as a foundation for how they action intuition into their everyday.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's those experiences, we learn from them, so that we get the next incident, and so if anything in life happens, like some internal family disaster or work related or neighbour related, whatever.
There's always a lesson.
Yeah, there's a lesson in there somewhere that if we learn it, I find it makes life easier later. And on that, I was listening to Joe Rogan a week or two ago, and he was talking about his Brazilian jiu-jitsu that he does and how hard it is. And I've never done it, but in his opinion, it's one of the hardest things you can do. And he says, he's in his mid-50s, and he goes, one of the reasons I keep doing it is because it's so hard, and it makes the rest of my life so easy. He's like, I can't reverse park. It's like, when you do these really hard things in life, or something is thrown at you that you don't even choose to do, if you can learn to respond through it to the energy of the moment and stay calm through it later on, next week, next year, 10 years' time, life will seem a bit easier because you've been through some hard yards, whether you chose them or not.
Whether you chose them or not. And I need to say here that if you look at people who have been successful in their life, whether it be a professional athlete or a successful business person, a big part of that is the time they've remained connected to what they're trying to achieve. And look, I don't know whether it's entirely true for everyone. Like anything in life, a general concept or general observation doesn't fit everyone. But Malcolm Gladwell in his writing spoke about that the people who spend a long time doing things and doing them correctly, become experts. And the figure that he would refer to would be 10,000 hours. Whether it be a piano player, who through that 10,000 hours, that means that they've practiced every day. They've done their exams because, and I don't know what the approach is now, but my mother was a piano player and she went all the way through the system, the different levels, to become someone who was deemed to be very good at what they do. So the same concept applies to whether you're a firefighter, whether you're a real estate agent, a plumber, a brain surgeon. It's the same thing. And I've come to know that the highly experienced people, they've earned that title of highly experienced because they've done the hard yards. And that's where when I being a person who's always been active in mentoring or helping people, particularly younger people or junior people who are on started their journey or their leadership journey, one of the questions is sometimes how do I get good at that quick, or how do I take on that skill quick, or whereas and I find myself answering, sometimes there are shortcuts, because if you don't do the work, then you're not going to make the mistakes.
That's right.
And you're not going to learn through experience. Yeah. So it's one of the common things for me. And I'm not saying that people are looking for shortcuts all the time, but certainly I think there's an element of people thinking, well, just give me the answers and I'll do that and I'll be successful, whereas it's much more complicated than that.
And the example you use of playing the piano is a classic. It's like, well, how do I get good quick? Well, instead of 20 minutes practice a week, you do 20 minutes practice 8 times a day.
Yeah, and of course the expression, it's not practice that makes perfect, it's perfect practice that makes perfect. And they're two very different things, because if you're practicing something and you're not doing it correctly, whether it's piano or martial arts or whatever, then you're not going to have the success that you want. Yeah. So, there's a lot to be said for people who are very particular about the skill or the action they're taking and doing it quite deliberately in a certain manner.
And it's usually a basic thing too.
Yeah,
it's having those basics down pat where you don't even have to think about them.
And look, I know, I've got a daughter-in-law who, sorry, I shouldn't say that, a future daughter-in-law who is very senior in martial arts, and I know that if she was here and I asked her to give an example of something that needs to be right to be able to improve or become better or become more experienced, I would imagine there'd be something like how you position your feet. Because if your foundation's not right, then the actions you take with the different moves that exist within martial arts, you haven't got a good foundation, therefore it won't be as good as what you want to be. Yeah. And I think, and I'm very much a strong believer in either first principles or foundation knowledge or experience or actions as being the fundamental to becoming more sophisticated and better at what you do.
And just takes me back to my recruit days in the fire service, 4 months of drilling out in the drill yard in the middle of summer, rolling out those 30 metre or 100 feet long hoses and rolling them up, roll them out, and all the ladder drills, just did it over and over. Well, and over in the summer.
Now you've raised that, and I'm going to disclose something which happened to me, and I've taken that as being a lesson for life right through. And it was the simple action that, and just to help the listeners, firefighters use drills, and a drill as in you take a team of people and everyone's got a job to do, and if everyone does their job, then it comes together as a solution. And it goes right back to the drills in fire service go back to artillery. So if you imagine a howitzer that's going to have a team, everyone's got a job to do to keep that weapon operating. And going back to my, and it would have been the very first weeks of my career, where one of my jobs on that team was to put chocks, fore and aft of the rear wheels of the truck to allow the pump to be engaged, because you can't put a handbrake on. You got to use the chocks to do that. And of course, that rear wheel sat right below the hose box, where, if you can imagine, for the listeners, one of the crew have taken the branch, which is the nozzle, and they're running out to get close to the actual fire to deal with it. And of course, so that hose it's flaked hose, so it's laid in a manner that you can pull it out pretty quickly. Yeah. And of course, every 30 metres you've got a brass coupling, which is a female and male thread, and so they connect, and that's how the different lengths of hose are connected. So
big chunky things, they're like 64 mil or 2.5 inch.
These are
big,
and I think they're I can't remember, but we're talking probably 1 or 2 kilos here.
Oh, easy.
And so these brass couplings are coming out every 30 lengths as the hose comes out. And I remember I hesitated and I looked at it, and I thought at the time, I reckon I can get those chocks in before the next one comes out. And again, very inexperienced, not able to make a sound decision. So I got in, putting the chocks down. Of course, the coupling came out and bumped me on the head as it moved off. And back in that era, you didn't wear helmets when you were doing case drill. You would wear your cap.
Yes.
For a little bit of sun protection, and I just respect the uniform. And of course, this thing, this coupling has banged me on the head. And I remember at the time, I think I shook my head, as in, shake it off, and kept going, as you do. And then when we lined up after the end of the drill, the officer, the actual training officer, would come and debrief the action, meaning what worked, what didn't work. And I remember to this day where that officer, as he moved down the line to speak to the different recruits, stopped and looked at me, and at the time I didn't know, but I had blood coming down from my temple, and I think I can't remember exactly what he said, but next minute I'm in the emergency room getting 10 stitches or something. But for me, it was it remains with me as an example of inexperienced people will make different decisions than an experienced person.
Yeah. You put in the hard yards and the time, and you'll be a bit wiser. Yeah, for sure. So I want to change tacks a bit here. Something I didn't talk about in the intro was your podcast, which is called Influence Me.
Yep.
Tell us about why you started it, why you called it that.
I've come to know that the expression to teach once is to learn twice. And for me, even though I had content knowledge of a lot of the subjects that we cover on the podcast, and the podcast is essentially directed at new and developing leaders or experienced leaders who are still seeking to improve or learn. And so, what commenced as it was a pretty, I always say abstract, but when I commenced it, I didn't sit down and have a long list of, I'm going to do podcasts and I'm going to do all these subjects. So I didn't do it from a technical. It was more about that I was taking what was happening around me in my own world, and there'd be times where I go through either something that went really well or didn't go really well with either me or my team or more broadly in the organisation, and I thought that'd be a great podcast because there's learnings that are coming out of my world or my day-to-day existence. And so I'd actually then think, well, geez, who should I ever talk to about this topic? And at times I'd use people who are in service, who are deemed to be respected or well experienced in it, or there were times where I'd go outside the industry and find someone who's an expert, and maybe an example of that might be, leader. One of the traps for leaders is that if you take on narcissistic behaviours as a leader, you're going to have problems from either success, how well the team, your team, stay with you or respect you or feel like that you've got their back, all those sort of elements. And so I thought, John, I need to get a psychologist in to actually have this chat, because I can talk very basically about the concept of ego and the different subsets there are to it from a psychological basis. But if I go beyond a certain depth, I'm out of my depth. So I thought, well, I need to get an expert in, someone who's actually trained in these matters, who can explain to lay people what it means to have an ego as a person, and the differences between healthy egos and egos that are not healthy. So we did the podcast, and of course I couldn't believe it. That was an example of one where I had a number of people reach out to me and say things like, "Oh, that was a great podcast, because now I understand why it was that that boss I work for didn't work for me." Or in other cases where I've had people come and say, "You've just reminded me, Andrew, that I've got to be better than what I am in how I apply my leadership." So I certainly didn't set out to say, I know all the answers and here it is. It wasn't about that. Because I found that every time I do a podcast, then I would actually reinvigorate my keenness to understand something even more. And so even though the podcast is focused on leadership in the emergency service context, the actual theory and examples that we use are applicable across the whole spectrum of life, whether personal, professional, all the different places that we spend our time.
So you want to be influenced. That's what it was about.
Yeah, and that's why the actual title of it was Influence Me. One of the challenges that our sector has, and this is not uncommon for industries or sectors that wear uniforms or have expressions of formal power, and whether it be a police officer or a armed services, the uniform people, lots of bling. Which screams, I'm important, yes. I carry authority, and therefore the risk becomes that people who are in that situation default to using formal power all the time, as opposed to becoming much better at being influential. And that's why we use the title Influence Me, because what I'm saying is that every podcast I'm looking for whoever I'm interviewing to help me change my perspective on something. So I'm open to being influenced, and the expression, minds are like parachutes. That they only work when they're open. Yeah. And that's what happens with leadership.
So talking about influencing people, it's one thing to influence those in our workplace. You've got 2 children who I've got the pleasure of meeting. I've scuba dived with them, yep. And what do you find the best or worst way to influence them or others who are not only close to, but who we have the biggest influence on simply because we spend the most time with them? So thinking to your children and the influence you've been now in the father role, it's like, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I would say that one of the things I learned as a parent that, and certainly children are an example, where sometimes, particularly younger kids, you have to use formal power as a parent, to keep that child safe or to improve the behaviour of the child. But as they get older, and particularly when they move into the teenage years, you've got to get better at using influence as opposed to power. Because if you keep telling them what to do and keep correcting them, in a very black and white mode, when they become adults, they won't have the skills to be able to gauge or assess what might be a good decision or a bad decision. So you're trying to set them up so they can self-manage. And I think what I learned, particularly through the teenage years, and I think this is one of the tensions you see between parents, particularly when there's a difference in terms of philosophy, and that creates sometimes tension between the parents. But I certainly learned that sometimes you've got to accept that you're not going to be able to change something in your teenage child, that you need to let them fall in that hole or put their foot in that pothole to learn a lesson. Even though you might be trying to influence them by bringing information to them, using expressions like, well, you need to work out your options and work out the pros and cons and everything, but you're trying to give them a pathway so that they actually become good at making good decisions. And we love our two kids, and we're very proud of them because they're both, I'll use a very simple term, good people. And what I mean by good people is respectful, try to value add to whatever situation they're in. Are they perfect? No. And the reality is there's no such thing as a perfect person on this earth. We're all a mix of our genetics and our upbringing and all the rest of it. And sometimes we're at our best and sometimes we're not. So with the kids, I think watching them go from teenagers to young adults and watch them achieve, and recently our two children both we were at their graduations for their uni, and that's an incredibly proud moment for a parent to see that your child has had the fortitude to continue through. And going back to your earlier comment about you've got to hang tough at those moments, because sometimes the feel is, or the reaction, that word, is that you want to run. You don't like this. This is uncomfortable. I want to get out. And I recall a conversation I had with my daughter about gap years, which is something that some kids do. They'll take a gap year after high school before they commence uni. Now, if they do that, if they have the gap year and then still jump in, great. But unfortunately, the stats show that too many of those who have a gap year don't end up going back. And so I think it was my daughter must have alluded to, I might take she was saying I might take a gap year. Because life is pretty rich, and they're seeing their friends, who are not taking the university road. They see their friends having freedom and doing things and enjoying their life, and think, oh, well, I want that, but I also want to do uni. So, and at the time, because she was a young adult, I didn't have power over her. I couldn't say, you're not going to do a gap year, you're going to, because they're not a young child anymore. But I remember having a chat with her, and I think I might have used injected into that discussion the risk of taking the gap year. And as it turns out, she didn't take the gap year. And there we were only a few months ago, sitting in the auditorium, watching her be presented or awarded with her bachelor degree, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of parallels with family, and particularly parent-child, and what happens in a workplace or in a team somewhere else, whether it be a sporting team or, as I said, within our emergency services industry.
Yeah. So which would you say harder, is dealing with your subordinates at work, or?
Oh, I think it's harder to do family well, and sometimes because actually this is interesting you raise that question, because I'm sitting here, as we all do, we try to explore our thinking to respond to the question, and so initially I said our family can be tougher, but I'm sitting here going, oh, but gee, I've had a few experiences at work which have been incredibly complex. So they've both got their challenges, but maybe for me, my natural inclination to talk about family, maybe that was me saying, both tough, but for me, it's immediately more important for me to do well with family. Because as you raise children, your influence on them will reduce over time, and you'll be looking for them to be the master of their own life.
Yeah, well, your responsibility level starts to reduce, I guess. And then I guess in the workplace at the time, you do have a lot of responsibility to your subordinates, but next month, if they're at a different station, then your level of responsibilities...
They've moved their team. They've moved the team, so it's pretty fluid as opposed to your family, unless something big happens. It's the same people that you're going to be interacting with.
Yeah. And I remember years ago you talking to me, like after I'd left the fire service, you'd risen up the ranks higher, and you were talking to me that you started to get involved in industrial relations, negotiations, and then I didn't realise until you sent me your bio about mentoring and things like that and awards you'd received. So the fairly high levels, you're dealing with unions, representing the fire service, and you're trying to get win-win outcomes, I guess, ultimately. And do you recall any moments of synchronicities or intuition when you were involved, like mentoring one-on-one or in these industrial relations negotiations?
I've got some clear memories early in the time where I was starting to play in industrial relations, and I think I remember having a real clear thought, I'm out of my depth here, because industrial relations by its nature has lots of history, and it goes back to the ruling of industrial courts on matters. Everything's connected to everything. So if you are not clear in your own mind about the environment you're in and the history, why it came to be that the Industrial Act has got this section in it and these clauses in it, then you're going to be found wanting. So that was a trigger for me to take steps to bolster my knowledge, and it was probably a bit of a theme for me. And whether it's I'm a natural learner or lifelong learner, who knows? But certainly. I could, looking back, I could look at multiple moments in my life, professionally and personally, where I realised that I'm short on knowledge here. And I think that my nature, being what it is, which is if I don't know something, then I'll say it. I don't know, which means that I either need to find out myself, or I need to find someone who can help me, because they're a content matter expert. And that's probably been important to me as I've gone through my professional life in forming teams around me or with me, that I become a lot more intuitive, to use that word, on the type of person I need in that team with me, because I can't provide that knowledge or that ability. So therefore, I need to actually have someone come in who will be that person who will help me help the team be the best it can be. So complex, like anything in life. You need time to be exposed to the different moments. It's a bit of a challenge environment in the sense that even though we like to think that win-win is an ideal concept, which I do believe it is, whether it be for relationships or for a business, and certainly in private sector, the very basic concept in terms of a capitalist society is that a business knows that if they provide a good service or a good product, then they're going to get repeat business, and that's the win-win, as opposed to a business that's dodgy or doesn't look after the client or customer. Then that return loop is pretty fierce. And I found that the notion of win-win doesn't naturally apply in IR, where by the nature of it, the different sides are going to have different agendas, and that took me a while to understand that and appreciate it, and in the end accept it, because my natural inclination is win-win, where I want to work with you and together we're going to come up with a solution where we both benefit. Whereas IR doesn't always work that way. There are cases and there are examples, and there is even some examples in private sector where the relationship between the industrial body or the union representing the workforce and the company is so healthy because they've worked out that it's both in their interest to have that outcome happen, whereas it doesn't always happen. And I don't have the solution for that.
Yeah. Interesting that you recognised your lack in certain areas and the need to bring someone in who could fill that gap. And
that goes back to the I mentioned ego before, and when you have a leader who's got too much of the wrong type of ego, then that invariably leads to that leader thinking that they have all the answers and all the solutions, and they're less likely to ask for help. And because in that case, it's that person's ego who says things like, if you ask for help, you're going to be seen to be weak, or you're going to be deemed to be weak. So you can't do that. And older concepts of leadership, used to really push that notion of, if you're the leader, you have to have the solutions. You have to have the solutions. No one else, not the team collectively, but you. And of course, that is I think that's quite self-limiting in terms of the concept. I'm not saying that you want a leader, particularly in emergency services. Some of the best leaders I've seen during a moment which is confronting and dangerous and high risk, I know they don't have the answer because they're still forming it in their mind, and they certainly don't walk around saying, "I've got no idea, and I've got no clue." I don't know. They don't do that. The better leaders, what they do is they remain incredibly calm, and they engage in the process of either gleaming out of their team what their options are, or engaging with other people there to actually help them form a solution. And a real quick example of that would be in most Western fire services around the world now. There are specialists who are we in Queensland here we call them scientific officers, whereas in other countries they probably call them different. But they're essentially industrial chemists. So you end up with these people, these specialists on the ground with you. Now, are they in charge? No, they're not. You're still the person in charge, but they're such a rich resource in terms of options. So, and again, I've seen the better leaders when they have a scientific officer come on, they certainly don't put that scientific officer over there and say, "Look, I'll come and see you in a minute." They're brought in as a resource really quickly, and I've probably learned over time how to really quickly deal with the high risk stuff first, and come up with solutions. Some of these these hazardous material jobs that can happen, they take time. Particularly if you're talking bulk amounts of a material or a really complex environment, they take time to resolve. So you end up having you need to chunk it down a little bit and deal with the immediate things right in front of you. And a real simple example that would be, if you have a large leak, whether it be out of a freighter or a tanker, you're trying to, if it's a flammable liquid, you're trying to stop it catch on fire because that's going to be problematic. So you're taking steps to make sure that you're getting rid of ignition sources, and you're getting hose lines out to be able to take steps. But that down the track, if you have to put water on that material, then you're going to run off. So you're going to have this secondary or tertiary problem down the road, which is where they get in the drains and gets in the creeks, and all of a sudden, particularly if it's certain chemicals, it's devastating for the environment. So it's I think there's a lot to be said for becoming very good at understanding your own limitations in terms of your knowledge. And a lot of the best leaders I've seen in the world, they tend to remain calm. They're quite happy to, within their team, I'm not talking about standing up in front of media and saying, I've got no idea, you know, but you can have that conversation with your immediate team internally to say, you know, we've got this option, what that option, what other options we got here? Come on, so you know, get people to, you know, whatever, and then you work it out, and then you agree on whether it's agreement through consensus or it's that in the case that you have different views in your team that are at each different views. Sometimes as a leader, you've got to take the decision because that's why you're the one in charge. And I think that is not always neat.
Just need to come on at this point and let you know, unfortunately, we had a technical glitch. As Andrew and I continued to talk, we didn't realize the recording had stopped. So I'm going to summarize here the final parts that we talked about. And we were talking there about, Andrew said that the fire service have chemical specialists that you can bring in when there's a chemical spill. So generally he was talking about helping to bring people in to help out with specific gaps in our knowledge and skills that we have in our life. I then went on to compare this scenario to engaging a coach to help you with various things in your life. You might have set some health goals, some financial goals, and you know who you would bring in to help with your finances would be normally very different who you'd bring in to help you with your physical health. And so we need to recognize where we have gaps in our life, where we want to improve, etc. So there are plenty of coaches out there that specialize in many, many different things. When you see that gap in your life, it's a great idea to bring people in. And I remember Andrew shared when I mentioned that, he said of all of the high-level people that he's met in his life, they all engage coaches to help them through the areas where they have lacks, and it helps bring up those areas as well. I know after Andrew, he spent a bit of more time there talking about having a diverse team around you with different skills, so that we've got these different people in our lives to call on who can help us out. We can help others with our strengths, and we have a team around us to help us with the areas that we're a little weaker in. And then finally, at the end, he talked about the importance of building those people up and having that team around you so that team can take on the baton once you've gone. You know, Andrew and I, if I was still in the fire service, I would have been there 41 years. And I'm not sure how many years it is for Andrew, but it'd definitely be getting up close to 40 years for him as well. So he's coming to a stage in the not too distant future where he'll need to pass that baton on to others. So it's great to leave that legacy of who we are, what we've done, what we've achieved, and we leave the world, we leave our employment, wherever it is we're leaving, a better place because we were there, because we helped build up those people. We secured those relationships with other people in our life, in our family life, in our friendship scene. And yeah, we just leave the world a better place. So thanks for joining us today. I know Andrew was very happy and excited about this conversation we had. And until next week, thank you. Have a great week. Bye-bye. Well, we're at the end of another thought-provoking episode. Remember to subscribe so you'll be alerted to new episodes. I want to say thank you to the men who are joining me on this journey of intuitive development. I truly hope our time together has expanded your reality and reinforced trust in your ever-reliable gut feeling. Embrace your intuition. It will not lead you astray. Until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and trust your gut.